Good evening, everyone. We are opening up. We are live on Facebook. Welcome to this event. How we got here, where we're going. My name is Damon Williams. I am so happy to be here with all of our folks watching us on Facebook Live, in the Zoom with us, people who will be listening to this audio later. We thank you for joining in this conversation and being a part of this multi-generational effort at Repair and at Liberatory Justice. My name is Damon Williams. I am going to be a co-host of this event tonight. We have an amazing panel for you. I am proud to be a part of the Let Us Breathe Collective. I'm the co-host of the podcast AirGo. And I'm also proud now to be working with the Chicago Torture Justice Center. And we are all May celebrating 6 years since the passing of the historical Reparations Ordinance here in Chicago, the first of its kind in our nation. And so we want to bring folks in always to ground in the work that has been done and to understand the history of the violence that is shaping our society, but not just to be retrospective or nostalgic or to treat this as a static history class, but to understand and to frame and propel the work that is needed and the work that we must do going forward. I'm thinking back now that this is the 6-year anniversary, and I now am proud to be a part of the CTJC team. I've been hosting these events for a few years now. And so I remember last year, we were just seeing the footage of Ahmaud Arbery. We were just really getting settled into the realities of this pandemic and social distancing and quarantining. And even since then, right, we've seen so much world change, so much of a unique and historically poignant response to police violence. And so even now in this past month or so, as we've seen another uptick in public destruction and state-sanctioned execution, warping and absorbing our consciousness, it's important that we understand this history of torture in the Chicago Police Department as a significant human rights violation that is in context of all of the violence that folks are in resistance to and stepping up to and naming. And so we are excited on this week where we are celebrating World Press Freedom, to be having a conversation about the work that has been done to understand this history of torture and the work and the fight for reparations, but also to understand at large when it comes to how we engage and counteract police violence, how the spread of information is vital to that work. So we have some amazing panelists that I'm going to introduce, and then our phenomenal moderator is going to take us away into a really great discussion. And we just want to remind folks that, as I said in this opening, the work is not done, and we encourage folks to plug in and support. And so that can obviously happen with your eyes and ears and with your attention and with spreading the word, but also there are resources that are needed to sustain and expand this effort and this fight. So we encourage folks tonight and all month to really consider contributing and donating to both the Chicago Torture Justice Center, which is in the process of opening and creating a new space and really needs our community to support that, but also the funding of the Chicago Torture Justice Memorial. And it's important to note that the fight has been vivacious and energized, and there's actually been an influx in some resources, but it is really important that as we are excited about some of our victories, we need to understand that the city has not yet upheld its commitment to supporting and funding this memorial of torture that was cited as a significant part of the Reparations Ordinance. So in addition to your support financially, we need to all understand that this city, whether you call Chicago home or not, has a responsibility that has not been upheld, and we need our people to make sure that we hold this space accountable. So with that, go to chicagotorturejustice.org and please, please, please donate to both the center and to the memorials. And with no further ado, I'm going to introduce our amazing guests and panelists. First and foremost, we have Gregory Banks. Greg is an activist and a learning fellow with the Chicago Torture Justice Center. He experienced abuse and torture at the Chicago Area 2 Police Station in 1983 and spent many years in the Illinois Department of Corrections due to being tortured and coerced into a false confession. Greg is one of the most amazing spirits and really a central voice to holding down and making sure that the survivor experience is at the core of what we are talking about when we politically engage police violence. So everybody, please welcome and clap while you're on mute or on stream, Mr. Gregory Banks. Right next to him, we have just a phenomenal, tireless warrior for justice, Mark Clements. Mark Clements is also a survivor of police torture for the Chicago Police Department. And at age 16 in 1981, he was taken to Area 3 violent crimes until he was tortured into a forced confession. Mark was one of the first juveniles sentenced to natural life without parole in the state of Illinois. He has remained incarcerated for 28 years, but since his work coming home, he has been at the forefront of so many movements, not just in Chicago, but nationally, making sure that he shows up with all families that are impacted by police violence and by incarceration. And I'm so proud and honored to see his work. And we have Mark Clements with us. Welcome to the stage. Also, we are honored to have in this space somebody very important to this work, Mr. John Conroy. John is the senior investigator at the MacArthur Justice Center at Northwestern University School of Law, but has also been a dynamic investigative reporter, and his House of Screams has been fundamental in us understanding and documenting and pushing forward this work of justice. And he also took his work and expressed it artistically with the play My Kind of Town, which premiered at Chicago's Timeline Theater. The play is set against the backdrop of the police torture that John was instrumental in helping expose. We also have with us Maurice Possley. Maurice is the senior researcher at the National Registry of Exonerations, a database of nearly 2,700 wrongful convictions in the United States since 1989. He was awarded a Pulitzer Prize in 2008 for his investigating reporter at the Chicago Tribune, and has done extensive work on prosecutorial misconduct, and also wrote George Ryan's memoir, Until I Could Be Sure How I Stopped the Death Penalty in Illinois. And I joke because I laugh at Illinois politicians, but that is an important history about the abolition of the death penalty in Illinois, which is deeply connected to this fight of repair led by survivors of torture. And last, but certainly not least, we have our very own, and she is all of ours, Joey Mogul. Joey Mogul is a partner at the world-renowned People's Law Office and has sought justice for Chicago police torture survivors for 20 years, successfully representing a number of Burge torture survivors in their criminal post-conviction proceedings. Joey was also instrumental in drafting the ordinance that we are now celebrating the anniversary of, filed in 2013 on behalf of Chicago Torture Justice Memorials that Joey helped initiate and co-found. And on May 6, 2015, the Chicago City Council unanimously passed the unprecedented legislation providing reparations to Burge torture survivors. And Joey has been an outspoken and widely supporter of legal and also institutional navigation, while also being grounded and rooted and connected to grassroots movements. So we are honored to have her here and to continue help us document and understand this history and this story and the work that we need to do moving forward, because history is not stagnant nor in the past, and we have a lot of work to do, and the time is now. And last but not least, I am so excited to pass it to our moderator, Ms. Trina Reynolds-Tyler. Trina is one of just my favorite people and someone I'm proud to call friend, but a dynamic organizer in the city, was one of the people instrumental in leading the phenomenal People's Grab and Go mutual aid effort this summer in response to uprising and pandemic, and is also one of the most brilliant people I know and a phenomenal data scientist that works with the Invisible Institute. So she is uniquely placed to talk about the intersection of information, of police violence, and how that information is distributed via media and journalism. And so I want to bring our moderator to the stage, Trina, and let you get in conversation with these amazing people. But if you just want to kind of kick off of the importance of information and how we circulate and tell the story of the violence of police that so often gets hidden or is locked in back rooms and does not get exposed.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Damon. It truly is an honor to be here in conversation with the folks on the panel today. And this work is so important, right? Not only archiving survivors' stories, but also like encouraging people or to face and remember what it is that has happened in this city. We talk about the 6 years ago and like the 4 years ago, but I love how you grounded us in this kind of discussion about what's happening today. And even in most recent events where the search warrant that was held at Anjanette Young's house, right? Something that she describes as a sexual violation, when thinking about the shooting of Adam Toledo, and many others that have already happened this year, right? It's important to recognize that this is not the past. This is like right now, and we need to actively be thinking about how we make this information accessible, right? So we have to access that information with our unique talents. We have to make that information accessible to the masses, being mindful of making that information accessible to survivors specifically, right? And then we have to have a lot of tough conversations about, how we make sure that this never happens again. And the last thing that I will name is that, there are so many survivors that we do not know their names, right? So many survivors who absolutely never came forward to discuss what happened to them, because sometimes that's just how people process trauma, right? And so regardless of even these individual cases that we have obviously made light to, right, we need to always remember that the conditions that encourage this, right, this behavior is deeply institutional, right? It's not about a single individual cop. It is about the whole system that creates an environment and like enables these violent acts. And so that'll be my 2 cents for now. I'm really looking forward to chatting more. And my first question is really about the House of Screams. So the House of Screams was written by John Conroy. I know we spoke about this earlier, but that was the first time that many people learned about torture that had been occurring in Chicago. And although it was the first time that many people, learned about police torture, it was not that was not the experience for everyone. And so I think that what I love to pass it to you, Greg. Can you tell us about how this piece impacted your story?
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you, Damon, for that introduction. And thank you, Trina. Oh man, I have to say this before I do anything. Give honor to God, allowing me to breathe this breath that I'm breathing. I want to say this to John Conroy. I haven't had the chance to say this, but I'm gonna say it now. If it had not been for John Conroy and him writing that paper and doing his investigation, and the People's Law Office, Jeffrey Haas and Flint Taylor and Joey Mungo, all of them that brought this to fruition, I don't even know if they would have ever known anything about the houses, the torture. So when I got a chance to actually when I had a chance to read the House of Screams, and this may sound crazy to you or to y'all, but when I read that, I was happy that I wasn't by myself, because I felt when that happened to me, I felt like they took my manhood from me, and that happened. And I never wanted anybody to know that I had given a confession, that I had been tortured and plastic bags placed on my head and them playing Russian roulette with me. I never wanted to anybody. I never thought that I would have the opportunity to tell anybody about it. But because of the House of Screams, I think that when I read that and I sing Anthony Holmes and I sing Melvin Jones' name and I sing Daryl Cannon and my rappy David Bates and I seen a number of people that I didn't know, but I seen people that I did know. And I said, man, I'm not by myself. Something is about to happen. And it did happen. My case got overturned. And I think more so than anything, even though the appellate court and what happened to the Wilson brothers, which was the leading case in my appeal, the Wilson brothers, by their case being known to a lot of people, I was so happy, man, that I wasn't by myself, man. And the House of Screams, I got a copy of the House of Screams now. And I read that and I'm just thankful, John Conroy, really. I'm thankful, man. I'm thankful that you did what you did, because if you hadn't done that, they wouldn't have probably they probably have never known what happened to us, And when I think about that, see, this stuff is deep, y'all. It's deep. This is deep in me. And it hurts, man, when I think about his brothers and sisters that's still locked up, and they never get out. They may never get out. See, I got another chance with and I got another one. And I said, no matter whatever happened to me in this life right here, from that day forward, that I would never stop fighting, man. Man, I said, I'll never stop fighting with them brothers and them sisters that's locked up. Because, man, they took everything from us when they did that. They took everything, man, and I hated that, man. I was mad. I was mad for a long time, but I'm not mad anymore. I'm not angry. I'm not mad like that. I was mad. And then I became angry. And people said, man, you got the right to be angry, man. What happened to you should have never happened. And I said that I would never let that happen to anybody else. And I'm gonna do everything that I can do. And in this life, I don't care what happens. I'm gonna keep on fighting. I'm gonna fight till there's no more breath in me. I would never stop fighting. Because this stuff hurts, and it hurts every day. But that hurt is what keep pushing me. That's what keep me going, man. And I tell y'all, man, John Conroy and the People's Law Office, Jeffrey Haas, Flint Taylor, Joey and them, if they wouldn't have did what they did, this wouldn't have happened. So, John, I love you, man. Thank you. Because you gave me back you helped me get back my life, man. Sorry for the crying, y'all. This is something for years, man, I couldn't cry. Now I'm glad that I can cry, because I wouldn't cry for years and years and years. Now, when I cry, I'm relieved. I get relieved from that hurt that I had. Yeah, it hurts, and it's probably gonna hurt for the rest of my life, but that's gonna keep me going. So
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for being so vulnerable with us and sharing your story with us and your spirit with us. This is, it's different when I think a lot of times people are looking at articles and pieces of paper, and I don't know if they're always able to recognize that like there are human beings who, you know, experience this and continue to experience this. And so I thank you so much for your courage, and I thank you for your time. Like I so thank you for it. Damon,
Thank
do you
you.
want to say anything before I push to the?
I just was here to offer Greg love, and you know,
Yeah.
when I heard you apologizing for releasing or expressing, I just wanted to hold and hug you and let you know that we are here to bear witness, and we are here to you should not be holding that by yourself also. So you are in a community that loves and supports you, and we are continuing that legacy of that resilience that you are sharing with us. So I didn't have nothing to say besides, Greg, I love you, and thank you for all that you do and the way that you keep showing up.
Yes, thank y'all, man. Thank you, and thank all of y'all for giving me the support that y'all have been giving me. So we all in this together.
So I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. I just because I, you know, I so appreciate you sharing, Gregory. I think I'm gonna I think I'll go to you next, John. You know, in addition to the House of Screams, you've also written two books and a play that reference the history of police torture. So in hearing the impact of your work, how do you understand the role and responsibility of truth tellers?
Trina, when I saw this question coming, I was a little baffled, and I asked Maury for some advice. And he wisely told me that the role of a truth teller is to ask questions, to look for truth and report it, look for layers, and don't take the easy answer. So that's Maury's wisdom there, for which I am very grateful. And just spinning off of that and spinning off of what Greg said, you know, that first article was a big leap for the reader and for me, in that I think most people in Chicago now are accustomed to police brutality and videos of executions. But in 1990, you know, we had had one DNA exoneration in the United States, and it had nothing to do with police misconduct or prosecutorial misconduct. And so looking back, I'm kind of surprised that we were so willing to do it. And then stunned by the lack of response. We got 4 letters, 2 were in favor of the torture and 2 were against. And looking back on my own work, I feel like I failed in a lot of ways. I failed individual victims of Burge and his people because I was in conversation with them. I never did a story. I never, you know, I was talked to Mark Clements. Mark, I talked to your mother 5 or 6 times. I talked back and forth with Eric Kane many times. I just never got it in the paper. And so on the issue of responsibility, it's tough. But I think I saw a movie once in which it was a documentary about a chaplain on death row in Texas. And the cameraman panned Maurice Possley's office, Maurice Possley and Steve Mills, and they had 600 letters. I'm guessing could be 1,000. And I just thought, shit, I feel bad. Look at Possley, Christ. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I so appreciate your willingness to acknowledge, right, some of the courage and, like, you know, the uniqueness of what y'all did at that time, and also recognize like some of the ways that you feel you maybe have failed individuals, right? Because, you know, there is a shared responsibility here across the board, not only you, right, but like a lot of people. You did contribute quite a bit of work here, and so we are so grateful for your time. I I do appreciate specifically this willingness to acknowledge failures, though, because we're always constantly learning. We're always constantly figuring out what the best next steps are, right? How to best share and make information accessible. And you're talking a lot, right? We talking a lot. I know Damon and I have talked so many times, right? And often, we are not heard until the 10th time that we speak. And that's why it's so important to, if you have the ability to continue to like talk yo smack, if I'm gonna do the PG version of what I would have otherwise said. So that, that brings me back, speaking of Mark, right? Mark, in your bio, you describe your work as a responsibility that requires many hours learning, lots of reading, and much communication with men and women that are incarcerated. How does keeping your eye on local news support your politicized healing and organizing work?
Thank you. And one thing that I do want to acknowledge, I love John's writings, but I also love Maurice's writings as well. And I think that many of us, we had no reality that tortures had occurred to so many different people. And it was through their writings that we begin to learn just basically how deeply enrooted this game of corruption had gone, meaning John Burge was corrupt, the prosecutors were corrupt, most of us were poor individuals stuck in prisons with long sentences, charged with crimes that people would basically demonize us for. Sitting in prison all of these years, and I remember when Maurice came down to the prison to visit me, all I could do is thank God and cry. Because, and as a journalist, they probably don't understand that you can tell your story so much to the point where that you are unbelieved. And now someone, I don't care if they just give you a piece of candy, it's more than what has transpired in your life. Me being someone 16 years old, railroaded by the criminal justice system, forced to learn behind prison walls. When I say forced to learn, that's where I received my education. Now being given a natural life sentence, told that I would die inside of a prison system, no one believed us. And what was so remarkable to me was how John, as well as the Chicago Tribune at that particular time, they spearheaded off of each other. And it allowed for this information to reach ears and eyes that we could not possibly reach. Me, when I left prison, I was saying, man, something has to change. What? I didn't know. So when they opened up the prison door, maybe Joey can contest to this, I just ran. Because it's kind of hurt. It hurts me to see mothers, they're crying for help and no one would help them. And I'm not saying, John, that you failed me, because you didn't. I understand how much I'm wore out now. I'm just keeping it real. I'm wore out now. I'm always tired now. This is a journey that if I could take it back, no way in the world I would have gotten involved into this type of field. It demonizes you with political officials. it keeps you where that you're always with your eyes and ears, because you never know when the cops are come knocking for basically speaking out against members of the Chicago Police Department. What amazes me is a police officer able to infiltrate the Black and brown community and to legally lynch them, and for it to really go unnoticed for more than a decade and a half before any type of writing started to surface. I remember sitting down with the same prosecutor who prosecuted my case, and they wrote a book, Courtroom 302, after this prosecutor. And I asked him, as well as I asked the judge, how dare you use my goddamn disabilities against me because I couldn't read, because I couldn't write, and you demonized me. You gave me 4 murders and you stuck me inside of a prison. The best way I could do as a human being was to explain to the judge before sentencing that you made a mistake. Yes, I have done a lot of things in my life, but it didn't make me a murderer. And really, I think that our media today has downsized. They have put water in the mix of a lot of their stories now today. And to be honest, maybe that did transpire when Maurice was a writer and when John was a writer. But I've never seen it like I see today. And it scares me. It scares me due to the fact that just because there were tortures in my era, what is the new game of the police department and railroading people to prison to sit there for the rest of their lives? We have entirely too many people stuck inside of our prisons. Many people may look at me as being unlearned, because if I see a politician, I'm going to ask them, how dare that you tell me that you can't help us when you can help us? We shouldn't have to beg for a torture memorial. We shouldn't have to beg for anything in the city of Chicago. I often say, how dare the mayor lie to me? I sat down with her most likely before anyone sat down with her to try to build some type of transparency. Because what I'm wondering and trying to still wonder is, how in the world can Chicago police tortures be so widely known now today, but judges often still reject men relief inside of our court systems? We have a lot of work to do, and that work to me is going to have to be bridge work. That bridge work meaning that somewhere along the line, media is going to have to trust us, and we're going to have to trust media, and we're going to have to expose this for what occurred to us. It's a shame that no John Burge story, other than when John Burge was found guilty, ever reached the national front. Never. There is not one national documentary that has ever been written or produced that deals with Burge tortures, other than what I seen you produce, John. And that kind of like, it scares me. So yes, we do need a memorial so that these Black kids and so that these Latino and Mexican kids and all kids can be able to reflect upon the fact that John Burge, he created his tortures in the early 70s, and he remained there until he was fired roughly around 1993. He never went to jail for tortures, but went to jail for perjury. He never went to jail for doing anything to a kid. Where was the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services in the mix of all of this? When you had a 13-year-old Marcus Wiggins beat half to death and stuck with electrical prongs in his body. The whole system, they failed us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate, that you ultimately just named, right? Like, there was a moment in time where there was some acknowledgement, but not really on a large scale about the multiple individuals who have been impacted by this. And like you said, right, the criminalization of people experiencing poverty, right? That's a real thing. When looking at where police are, it is often in communities with a lower socioeconomic background. And so, one has to ask these questions, right? Like, it's just like, often we're seeing, even within the complaint data, these stories where people are discredited because they were possessing, a drug, or, X, Y, and Z, right? They are perceived as, having a mental illness, right? And being described as aggressive, even though, I mean, regardless, right? That's not how we treat human beings. So thank you so much. This just brings me to, I appreciate that you named Maurice, and also just like the reporting right around that time. And so, Maurice, your career as a criminal justice reporter has probably landed you in a lot of newsrooms where people were reporting on criminal justice, right? But often they were not including survivor stories. So how do you understand journalism's role in creating conditions that fuel mass incarceration and police torture? And what steps can be taken to counteract it?
I'm going to take the hair shirt from John for a minute, but I think John's a little too hard on himself, actually. And I want to thank you all for the kind words. I think there's a lot of cultural issues here. I started right out of college learning to be a reporter in 1972, which really sort of parallels, what we're talking about here. And what they did at City News was you started working the night shift you worked in police stations. And so to do your job, you had to become friends with police officers. And when you saw the veteran police reporters there were 4 major newspapers in Chicago at that time, they socialized with police officers. So there was a culture in the media, and I believe there was a culture in the police department of looking the other way, of saying that a lot of this stuff was just acceptable because it was part of doing the job. And I think that, I had sort of my own personal epiphany about this in the mid-90s when I covered the 3rd Rolando Cruz trial and saw that him be acquitted at his 3rd trial, where they were trying to send him to the death chamber for the 3rd time, and realized that, this was a false confession. It never happened. And what I realize is how over the years it was ingrained in me that if a prosecutor said it, it was probably true. If a police officer said it, it was probably true. And changing that meant sort of flushing out everything that I had learned and start to learn over. And I look back and what John did was go after a culture that was not only what was going on in the police department, but was going on in the media itself, of not being questioning about these things, and maybe even seeing it and just looking the other way, not acknowledging it, not asking the right questions. I remember at one point going up to the city desk at the Tribune, this is in later years, and saying, I've got a story that we have exclusively that we can have for tomorrow about an exoneration. And an editor looked at me and said, haven't we done that story? Well, yeah, it's a different person. I mean, there's a fatigue that actually comes in, that comes into play in the media. And I think that it's really, reporters have a lot of responsibility to keep pushing even against this fatigue. You know, you say, so now I write up wrongful conviction stories for the National Registry of Exonerations. It went public in 2012, and as it was mentioned, we're close to 2,700 exonerations. And of those, I've probably written about 2,000 of those stories. And so every one of those stories is an individual tragedy for a lot of people, not just the defendants, but for the families, for people. It ripples. And telling stories is what I think we need to do. And more, the more and more that you tell the stories, you start to get a critical mass. And somebody has to be first. And John was that person. And, you know, I look back today, we did a series on false and coerced confessions in 2001. So it took us 10 years before the Tribune really caught up and took a deep dive, and we looked at 10 years worth of murder cases in Chicago and found almost 250 where police said someone confessed and one of two things happened. They were acquitted or the charges were dismissed. And that meant you have to step back and say, well, so what's the right question here? And the question is, once every 2 weeks, on average, for a decade, police said someone confessed and yet there was no conviction. And so that either means a guilty person went free or an innocent person was charged. And what's wrong with the system? You know, there are 339 official exonerations in the registry that are false confession cases. 30%, 100 of those are in Illinois, and 86 or 25% of all false confession exonerations are in Chicago. Now, 26 of those, and we have a specific criteria. And so not everyone gets in. 26 of those are Burge related. Does that mean that the other 60 false confessions in Cook County are independent? I don't think so. I think it's this culture that is just the worst end of the spectrum. Okay, the torture. That's the worst end of the spectrum. That this goes, there's an arc of police work that is considered good police work to solve a case by a confession. I could go on. You know, Peter Neufeld said it as good as well as anyone when he said, Chicago is to false confessions what Cooperstown is to baseball. It is the Hall of Fame. And, you know, watching the Jackie Wilson trial earlier, you know, you just see how this is, the legacy goes on, and people have to tell these stories. And it is a challenge in a time of diminishing resources in the media, diminishing attention span. And you know, I think Mark said it, you just have to keep pushing. You have to keep pushing, and you have to keep telling your stories. I mean, if there's one thing I learned is you write one wrongful conviction story and the next day your mailbox is full. And it's not because it's people that are disillusioned, it's because it's full of people telling the truth. And there's just not enough of us to go around. You just hope that, you know, you can get people convinced to devote some resources to it, because there is, you know, you look around the newsroom in 1972 and 1980, and did you see people of color? No, you just didn't. And I think that, you know, that's when you talk about a culture, you're talking about a culture of, it was rare to cover issues like poverty, wrongful convictions, corruption in police. It just was rare. You know, for years, and if a police officer was charged, it was because the feds did it, not because the state's attorney's office did it. So, you know, I just think that people have to be encouraged, and by that I mean media people have to be encouraged to listen to stories, that there are stories, that there are still stories, and that these stories have meaning and should be told.
Thank you so much, Maurice. And I really appreciate that you named, you know, part of the job, right? You were like, this is a thing that is a part of the job, you know, acknowledging that, you know, this is a common practice, the practice of harming people, you know, with the goals of like getting the bad guy or doing their job, right? There is like violence interwoven into every part of it. And so I thank you so much for sharing with us as well. I know you all are really excited for this question and answering portion, but I have one more person who I'm going to ask the question of. And, you know, obviously, Joey Mogul could speak to the past and the present, but today I'm going to bring it in and think really about the future. You know, Joey, it's really been an honor to watch you work within so many spaces, because you've been able to share insight about legal institutions, you understand operating within city government, and then also within organizing spaces. And so I'm curious, you know, moving forward, how do we hold the inside strategy accountable and propel it? And then what should journalists and media makers be working on today? I know it's a big question. I know you're going to have so much to say, but the floor is yours, Joey.
Oh, thank you. It's such an honor to be here, and I appreciate hearing from everyone and learning their insights. But I also want to give a particular shout out to Greg and to Mark, because I'm, you know, obviously, you know, you all have been through so much, both your torture, your incarcerations, the decades of disbelief. And it's obviously still very painful for you, but you nonetheless are just selfless in your perseverance and resilience and sharing your truths and trying to fight for others. And that is just a beautiful quality of both of you that is heartwarming and inspiring, and it's very moving. And I appreciate all that you do. You know, how do we hold the inside accountable? I think, you know, I'm someone who believes that we hold the power of collective action, and it's essentially the power of the people is the way that we're going to get the most profound change. And I think if you look at the Burge torture cases, what we can see, the through line is that the insiders, whether it be the judges, the prosecutors, the city officials, never wanted to take responsibility for these racist acts of torture, did not want to stop them, did not want to investigate them, did not want to hold people accountable, and instead did everything in their power to cover it up. And fortunately, it was through the journalism of John and Maurice and others that helped bring the truth to light. I think it was through the litigation that helped uncover and document this pattern and practice of torture. And it was also the perseverance and resilience of the torture survivors who, despite being denied, disbelieved, and shut down time and time again, continued to fight to tell their truths and their stories. And it was that collective information, that collective storytelling was then used by the people, right, to get Burge fired from the Chicago Police Department. It took a movement to make it happen. Maurice, you and Ken Armstrong and Steve Mills did this amazing set of articles around the death penalty. It led to reforms by the courts, but really nothing changed. It wasn't for a clemency campaign. that then led to the clearing out of Illinois' death row. That was, again, a people-centered movement. That was an organizing strategy that led to not only the commutation of people's death penalty sentences, but then to the abolition of the death penalty in Illinois. I think Burge wouldn't have been prosecuted if it wasn't for boots on the ground. And then finally, there is just no way we would be here today as a group amongst the Chicago Torture Justice Center and the Chicago Torture Justice Memorials if we did not get reparations legislation passed. And I guess I wanted to say to the media people who are following this today, people often remark that this is a legal settlement. It's not a legal settlement, people. This was an organizing campaign that then got and convinced and moved and pushed our mayor, Emmanuel, and our legislators and the city council to pass this reparations legislation. There was no way to litigate to success. So where are we going from here? Well, we're back again and seeing that we need, and I think the reality is, if we look in this moment right now, we see that the organizing that's going on and the popular education around racist police violence is far ahead of the inside game. It's far ahead of the courts. It's far ahead of our politicians. It's far ahead of COPA or any police accountability organization. I mean, you know, regardless of whether it's legal for a police officer to shoot someone with a gun or not, we are seeing people turn out in the street saying, not in our city, not on our watch, and this is unacceptable. And so I will say this for the future. I think the organizers and the movement and the popular understanding that we have right now is far ahead of where the institutions and the inside game is, and we need to keep pushing it forward. I guess I want to say finally, you know, we're in this historic time and we're in this historic conversation here at the Chicago Torture Justice Center that provides healing services and community services that's unprecedented in the nation. We need to support this institution, okay? We also, though, need to create and solidify the dominant narrative around the Burge torture cases, right? John, you wrote in your piece, in your blog about the Burge torture, about Burge's prosecution back in 2010, that most of the jurors who were being questioned about whether they could sit for the jury, most of them came forward and said they knew nothing about the Burge torture cases, even though it was reported in the mainstream media. And it was a dominant story in the mainstream media prior to Burge's trial in 2010, but people still did not know it. And so I think there's an importance to media, but I think, and we need journalists like you to keep covering this, but we need to create our own markers where we can enshrine this dominant narrative. And that is where the Burge Torture Justice Memorial needs to be created. We need a commitment from Mayor Lightfoot, who has not given it to us today, that we are going to build this memorial fulfilling the reparations legislation so we can inscribe this racist history into the landscape of Chicago. And we can also document the perseverance and resilience of Greg and Mark and all the torture survivors and their family members. And we can document and memorialize the 4-decade-long struggle for justice in these cases so that we can learn from this and it can propel us to fight on for even more justice and more liberation.
Thank you so much for that, Joey. I think that's right on point. There's this relationship between those experiencing the harm, those naming the harm, and those that are fighting to do something about it. And we hope that we can exist in the same room as we've been able to do in this conversation. But it's important, particularly for those who are privileged, to not be directly impacted by this violence, to step up and do our part. And so this whole month is a call-in or an opportunity to step in and do your part. So there'll be many more events that I just want to name before we shout out the folks on the Facebook Live and shut that down and close up in our Zoom here. But before folks go, I just want to, remind you again to please go to chicagotorturejustice.org, where you can donate to both the center and the memorial. And there will be a month worth of events that are going to follow this. So there's going to be a press conference tomorrow morning that we want all of our community to look up from. We got Mothers of the Movement, an event with different mothers that have organized, with a panel that is going to be moderated by Mark Clements. We also have a maker sessions later this week. There's going to be a tattoo artist fundraiser, a politicized healing session, as well as some West African drumming and body movement. And then also, I'm very excited, we're going to have a performance by Avery R. Young. So please stay connected to Chicago Torture Justice projects through this month. Please support everything you hear. And I want to take a few questions from the audience, from the Facebook Live before folks hop out of here. I just want to make sure we got those plugs in. And it looks like one of the ones that's coming up that's really important that Maurice, I heard you start to speak towards. So if other folks have something they want to add. The question is, Burge was not an anomaly, I believe. And for this person asked this question, it's not just your belief. You got some people that will stand with you on that claim. And so how or in what ways is anyone looking at what's going on now? So, I know that I think we can talk, Joey, you have something to pop in on that first. And then if anybody else wants to popcorn on that answer of, we know that the police are still violent and torturous. How are we looking at this in our current time?
Well, I just want to quickly say, we still have at least 13 Burge torture survivors who are still behind bars fighting to have their claims of torture heard. And this does not account for all the other police torture survivors who were not tortured under Burge's regime that are still fighting. Burge had a lot of henchmen. Many of them were never disciplined. They were allowed to retire from the force. And we're seeing that the courts are not granting those people, particularly individuals who were tortured at Area 3 or Area 1, any relief. And we need to recognize that, people were trained and they were basically encouraged to engage in acts of torture. I think, I can go on, and I think we're seeing, again, just the continuing racist state violence, whether it's police killings, with shootings, tasering, sexual assault and misconduct that is going unabated, undeterred, that we need to think about it. And I think that's why we're seeing the rise of the Defund CPD campaign, which is, I think, timely and right on. But I also just want to say that I think we need to have a larger conversation about the way police interrogations work. And I think there's a lot of work that's being done that recognizes that the tactics used by police officers, particularly the Reed method of interrogation, absolutely coerces people without using physical abuse, but using mental tactics and psychological coercion to extract people's confessions. And I'm really hoping that we see a lot more media and a lot more journalists start to uncover some of those tactics as well.
If I can just add, I think one of the things I learned is that I needed help from people in the defense community to point me in the right direction, or to provide me with information that I could use to write to underpin a story. And it took time to develop trust. I remember having a conversation with Karen Daniel, who I miss dearly. And Steve and I were going to work on a case that she and Jeff Erdangen were involved in. And she was reluctant to let me look at the police reports and the documents in the case. She said, what if you find out something, if you come to conclude that my client is guilty? And I said, I move on to the next case. I do not want to write a story that says so-and-so is still guilty. That's not my job. My job is to look for cases that I can show is a wrongful conviction. And ultimately, we wrote that story about that case. But it involves people in the defense community finding reporters that they can build a system of trust, that they can provide information to them and point them in the right direction, and that they won't be violated them, so that trust won't be violated.
I will just, oh, go ahead, Mark.
Just quickly, Trina. So I think journalists, and I think that I followed this a little bit more careful than most people. Journalists, since your retirement, since Steve's absence, it's watered down, and it's like taking steps back. And it's now you have to convince particular journalists that even what Burge did was wrong, or that did he do it? And I have a problem with media putting in alleged Burge torture survivor. If the city of Chicago gave you one roach free of charge, guess what? They gave you that roach to try to hope that you would go and sit back, due to the fact that they already know that the claims that you're making has forms of, they're credible. It's like mothers. We're dealing with a hurting generation, and
Uh-oh, we lost you for a second, Mark.
We lost your audio. I think you're on a separate audio.
Yeah, we're still losing.
Okay, am I back?
There you go. You're back.
Okay, well, I'll just wrap this up. It's a shame that human beings could stoop to this level, and they used young kids' disabilities, older people disabilities, and they used this stuff against us. Man, I have played a role in at least 312 people being released. People don't understand how that makes me feel. It makes me feel old. It makes me feel just like I never had a youth. And every day I try to find out if I could ever have a youth. Police tortures, it messed my life up. And messing my life up, I just wonder about all of those other brothers and sisters and mothers, how much they're suffering. So I'll just end it, but media definitely have to get on board. We need a memorial center.
Thank you so much, Mark. I was just gonna really quick add that so I'm the director of data at the Invisible Institute. At the Invisible Institute, we have these complaints filed against police going all the way back to, honestly, 1974, but on our website we have 1988 to 2018. I just want to name that many of the stories that live within complaint data, are from people who are survivors of police violence. And a lot of times people just automatically refute the credibility of the hundreds of thousands of people who have come forward for decades now, since at least we know OPS began in 1974 and then to 2007, and then IPRA from 2007 to 2017, and now we have COPA, and so there, this thing that you're naming, right, this acknowledgement as oh, this thing happened and we're gonna give y'all a little something, but y'all could keep it. It's no, there is a whole thing happening, and it is all the way in the prisons and all the way to the daily mundane interactions that police have with community members on a regular basis. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to just add in one piece of framing, but also bring in some of the affirmations that have come in from the Facebook specifically. So Mark and Greg, just so many folks appreciating you, naming your brilliance and the gifts that you've offered. One person said that they've began, doing work around exonerations and false confessions from some of this story. So just to let you know that there are so many people who are listening and who hear you and are grateful. And so to that question of, moving this a little bit more of a contemporary understanding, and I want to merge that with another question that we got about the survivors dealing with the notion of disbelief and how can we create other storytelling containers beyond relying on institutional media and journalism, especially with the divestment in mainstream media and where it has gone in our neoliberal world. I want to be that guy that goes back to my experience in 2016 with the occupation we did called Freedom Square across from Holman Square. And that again was a chosen site for direct action because of some journalism that was exposing many documented cases of torture and illegal communicado detention and false confession coming out of that space. And what happened was we then showed up, and so many people that did not even know why we were there were able to come and share their story. And that was as of 2016, and people said that had been happening to them within that last year. And so from that experience of then showing up and then doing the work, so many more people have heard about that dynamic or story. Even while we were there, police officers tried to take a young boy that was engaging with our encampment into an abandoned movie theater. And if it wasn't for community engagement, we don't know what would have happened in that space. I go to another example of how showing up brings out so many of these stories. I honored Dorothy Holmes in as many spaces as I can, the mother of Ronnie Man Johnson. Just this past year, as we were honoring his life again in the park where he was killed by Detective George Hernandez, a man who was living in the elder facility across the street just pulled up and said, "What are y'all doing here?" And said, "My son was killed by the police." And so to that question of how do we continue to tell the story without only relying on major outlets, particularly with the technology advantages that we have now, it is show up and name that you are standing up for justice and against injustice. And you will be surprised how many folks who have been disbelieved or been silenced or who've held trauma in will be present and will share their information. And then it's our responsibility to continue to bear witness. I know we're running a little bit on time. So I want to, if in the chat, if anybody can give me a heads up, but I just got one really deep question that I want to bring to the space if folks are present. I think it's relative to something Maurice named, but I think John can maybe talk about this too. So I'll put myself in this. I identify as an abolitionist, and I believe that this institution being torturous is not an anomaly, but actually very much in line with all of its historical roots and the role that it has played in history, particularly relative to Black Americans. And so within that, within the abolitionist thinking, there's been a complication of this divide between innocence and guilty. And understanding if all police is torturous, then we need to be responding to all human rights violations. So the question was, why not also pursue stories of guilty people who were tortured? Even if they're guilty, aren't those abuses and violations and constitutional rights still wrong? And if we only pursue stories about innocent people, are we excusing the treatment that those who are deemed guilty by the state experience, even though we still know it to be wrong? So that's a challenging question. And I think we'll probably close our Facebook after that and say our thank yous. But if y'all have any thoughts to challenging some of the relationships between guilt and innocence relative to state violence.
I'll offer one thought, and that is that it's just as bad to torture, I believe that, to torture the guilty as it is the innocent. But in the court of public opinion, okay, which is when you're writing, it's tough to build a case on the backs of guilty people. And I'm not excusing it, but I'm saying when we, one of the things that we did at the Tribune was try to let data drive the story. So you're going to look at all murder cases in a 10-year period. We're going to look at all death row cases. We're going to look at, all, and the faces that you want to get to hopefully make the difference are people that are wrongly convicted. But you cannot forget the people who are guilty, because you're exactly right. These are violations. These are, this is, and they should be entitled to, the same fair treatment as anybody else. I'm not trying to justify emphasizing the innocent. I'm saying that, one of the things I also learned is I thought for a while that, the pocketbook effect might influence policy, people's thinking, but it really doesn't. Even in a city that's self-insured, it just rolls off taxpayers' backs, the millions when they settle the Ford Heights 4 case for $40 million, whatever that was. So it's kind of like, what do you find that gets some traction with people? And I think it's a problem, because people tend to think that guilty people deserve it. And that's just ugly.
Thank you. Joey, I saw you say something in the chat. I'll just throw it to you right quick. And then I saw John coming off, but I feel like that's important to name.
I mean, I just want to say, like, there are Burge torture survivors who remain convicted of their crimes and may have committed the crimes, but we fought for all of them. And we got reparations for people who were both guilty and innocent. So I do hear what you're saying, Maurice. It's very hard, but I also think the moment we're in is saying we need to look past this, crimes that people commit and recognize everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and humanity, and they're entitled to, redress for the violations they incur. But, I also know, John, you covered many people who were not innocent, right?
Well, Andrew Wilson wasn't innocent. He did shoot those 2 cops, and he was the basis of House of Screams. And perhaps that's why it was so hard to sell it to the public. I think Maury is right. There's a lot of people who just don't care what happens to people whom they perceive to be guilty, and they perceive a lot of people to be guilty who aren't. But that doesn't mean that, as Maury said, and as you've said, Joey, that the guilty aren't deserving of the same human rights as everybody else.
I just also want to say, like, we have a very narrow definition of crime and of who constitutes a victim and who constitutes a perpetrator. And I think, we get lost in it in these cases, and we let the criminal legal system define this for us. But again, I feel like the public and the movement is way ahead of us right now, or way ahead of and not allowing the legal system to define who's innocent, who's guilty, who's a perpetrator, who's a criminal. And there are a lot of corporate crimes out here. There are a lot of environmental crimes out here that cause a lot of damage, and we're not holding them accountable. But I guess I just want to throw out there that not everyone is, a lot, we all commit bad acts. We all do harm to others. We should not be defined by the worst acts that we commit. And again, we are all entitled to humanity and dignity. And I think that's the lens that we need to start using. And journalism will catch up with us.
Mark, did you have a final word?
Yes. A little bit of homework I forgot. I want to thank all of the mothers, all of the attorneys, all of the journalists, and just send condolences to Brother Brian Nelson, who lost his life fighting for individuals inside of the prison system. I agree with both sides. It's a very difficult task when you're dealing with innocence or guilt, but I believe that once a person's human rights has been violated, I think that that should supersede in that particular arena. If I had $1 for everyone who, once I was freed and I somewhat felt red flag me that they were guilty, then I would be super rich. The bottom line of it is this. I think that what John Burge did is something that should remain it affects us each and every day. It has to be some way to bring some type of historical attention to the community as to what John Burge did. And some of the brothers, not mentioning any of them, it totally messes me up to see how the system was allowed to mess them up behind prison walls. And with them now being out and now having a better sense of this society, I just shake my head because they don't have much of an opportunity. And that is one thing that I think that we need to focus upon, and it's called some type of angle dealing with state reparations, because they have caused harm in ways that is unimaginable, and especially through Tom Dart when he was a state representative and he came out with all of these so-called reforms shortly before Edgar had lost office. Right now, our prisons are nothing but, as John said, the House of Screams. They are the House of Screams behind IDOC. But love you all.
Thank you for that, Mark. I want to take the time. We're gonna close up our Facebook Live, but I really want to take the time to thank you, Mark and Gregory, for all the work that you do with CTJC and beyond, but for really, bringing your experience to this space again and continuing to live through your pain for the healing and the justice of so many more. John, Conroy, and Maurice Possley, we thank you so much for your multiple years of work and continuing to stay connected to this effort and to our community. Joey, we appreciate you for fighting and for showing up. Thank you so much for your work and your knowledge. And Miss Trina Reynolds-Tyler, so grateful for you and the Invisible Institute and all the work that you do. And it really meant a lot to have you and your voice and y'all's team be connected to this event here. So go to the Invisible Institute's website and you can see the Chicago Torture Archive to learn more about this history. Please, again, I remind you, go visit chicagotorturejustice.org where you can donate to both the center and the memorial. We have so much work to do. And as we heard in this conversation today, we have to remember that John Burge is a name and a figurehead that does represent an extreme of a spectrum, but is not an isolated incident or figure, and that this practice of torture and destruction of life and community extended beyond one person, one commander, and one police station. It has continued for lifetimes, and the healing is going to take generations. So reparation means to repair, and the state has a responsibility, but they are not equipped to make it right what has been wronged. And so that's where we come in, and we love you. And this act and this work of healing and bearing witness is primarily an act of love, but we have to be determined and dedicated because we have so much work to do. Thank you, everybody on Facebook. We're going to shut y'all down. We appreciate you. For folks in the Zoom, I think we're going to stay for just a few seconds to hang out. If some of our panelists have to leave, we understand because we ran over. But thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm also going to invite Aislinn Pulley of the Chicago Torture Justice Center to kind of come off. And we're going to have just more of an internal debrief conversation for some of our guests that are here in this Zoom. So, Aislinn, I just want to warm the pool a little bit. And you were listening and you were commenting, and you've been very connected to this work. What are just some of your first thoughts or feelings after hearing this conversation and seeing Mark and Greg in conversation?